Welcome to Ancient Life Hacks. I am Jared Madsen. I have a master's degree in Chinese medicine. I lived in China for many years. I'm fluent in Chinese, but I'm also deeply fascinated with ancient cultures from around the world, especially the wisdom we can gain from those cultures and apply them to our lives today. All right, today we will be talking about Dante's Inferno. So if you don't know what that is, I will give you a brief history of what that is. We'll talk a little bit about why we want to talk about Dante's Inferno and how that can possibly be used in our lives today. And then what we're really going to do is we're going to go through the Inferno. We're going to go through the 9 levels of hell, see what it's like, and can we learn any lessons from it? All right, so let's dive in. Dante's Divine Comedy was written by Italian poet Dante Alighieri. My Italian friends will all laugh at me for my pronunciation. Between 1308 and 1320, it's considered one of the most important works of Italian literature and was composed during the late Middle Ages. Dante completed it shortly before his death in 1321, 700 plus years ago. The poem begins with Dante, the protagonist, finding himself lost in a dark forest, symbolizing spiritual confusion and sin. He embarks on a journey guided by the Roman poet Virgil through the depths of hell, up the mountain of purgatory, and into the celestial spheres of heaven. Along the way, Dante encounters a multitude of souls and witnesses their fates. The Divine Comedy also had a profound impact on Christian theology and religious thought. Dante's vivid depictions of heaven, hell, and purgatory sparked theological discussions about the afterlife and morality. Okay, today we will only be diving into Inferno, into hell. If you guys like this, we can do the other 3 later on, but we won't do that today. Now, this is written kind of as it's a story, and it's also written in a type of prose and a poem. So there are many different books you can buy. This is one that I like because it is Dante's Divine Comedy in plain and simple English. I will leave links in the description below to various copies of the Divine Comedy that you can buy, but I would highly recommend whichever copy you get, if you choose to read it, or you can just listen to me talk about it and call it good enough. But if you choose to read it, you want to get one that kind of gives you some hints into some of the symbolism, because it can be hard to know what the different things are. And then another thing is, I liked this one because this has it in kind of the old original translation that uses very old English, which is very beautiful, but then it also uses more modern English, which is a lot easier to understand if you're not used to reading old English. All right, so before we kind of dive into it, after this book was written, gradually it started to make an impact. And then it made this huge impact. So it's not technically a religious book, right? It's not the Bible. It's not a religious book in that sense. But after it was written gradually, people started to read it and go, wait a second. This seems like it's more than just a story. This seems like maybe he actually really saw hell, purgatory, and heaven? Is that possible? Did his soul travel there? Did he have some sort of vision? Was his third eye open and he could see stuff, or was it totally made up? Well, so a lot of people said, no, there's definitely more to this than meets the eye. And that's why it became a very important work for many Christians for hundreds of years in basically getting a very clear understanding of what these different areas are like and the actions or non-actions that people took to end up where they ended up. That brings us to another couple questions. So one, before we dive in, I also am thinking, hey, maybe we can do videos on hell from different cultures around the world, because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also differences. And then we can explore ideas, right? Are there different hells? You know, if hell, assuming hell exists, are there different hells? Is there only one? Is there different? What's the complexity? This is a conversation that we can have later. Today, we're just going to focus on Dante's Inferno. So we want to get a good understanding of this, and then we can have an understanding of some of the other ones, and then we can kind of go, okay, what's going on here? Is there something to this? Why are we talking about this? Ancient life hacks. Well, to me, it seems like morality, the concepts, the various concepts of what morality was, what it meant, have seemed to kind of, they're not really a topic that we talk about in modern days. Whereas in ancient times, in like every culture, not just religion, but just throughout the cultures of the world, morality was an incredibly important thing. And here is, with the Inferno, we're talking a little bit about the afterlife, but it would also, how does it affect your life now, right? How does being this way or being that way, what are your standards? Today, we kind of don't really have that conversation. We see it as maybe outdated, or maybe it's a religious conversation, and I don't believe in this religion or that religion, or maybe any religion. So therefore, this does not apply to me. Okay, maybe, or maybe it applies to all of us, no matter what we believe in. I don't know. We're kind of going to explore. So we're going to dive into Dante's hell, and maybe along the way we'll go, you want to know what? Maybe there's something to this, or maybe not. We'll try and get it figured out here today. So again, today we're not really going to go into the story. It's a good story. We're going to focus on more what he saw at the different circles, what the punishments were, and who, not so much who was there. We can dive into a little, because he did see some famous people from history. They're like, oh, that person was good. And it's like, oh, they ended up there, oopsie. And kind of what they did to get there, okay? So the famous saying, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. That is from Dante's Inferno. That is on, before they enter down into hell, that's what they see. That's the sign that Dante and Virgil see. So here we go. I guess maybe abandon all hope, follow the sign, or hope, don't. No, let's try to keep a little hope. Keep a little hope. Okay. The first level, or circles as they call it, because it kind of goes down. Hopefully there'll be an image that you can see. These circles go down until it gets to the very bottom. So the first one is limbo. Now we've heard this word, but we might not know exactly what limbo is. Well, you want to know what? We're going to learn right now. Limbo is the first circle of hell, okay? And it is unique because it is not a place of punishment, but rather a place of exile and separation from God's presence. It is reserved for souls who, while morally virtuous, lacked the opportunity to embrace Christianity and were not baptized. The souls in limbo include great figures from history and literature who lived before the advent of Christianity. Okay, so we're going to pause there for a second. We could look at this from a few different ways. If you look at it from the point of view of Christianity, it's pretty clear. There are good people and bad people, and then there are perhaps elevated good people, which would be people who follow Christianity. So if you end up in limbo, that means that you were a good person on earth, but you didn't follow the teachings of Christianity. Now, as we brought up previously, there are different cultures, and different cultures have different versions of hell, which would make one think, let's just pretend, just for discussion, because the discussion's not going to be fun unless we say this. Let's say that hell exists, and let's just say maybe there are different hells out there. And this one that Dante saw was one in particular. And maybe it was, for his time, the people around him, I don't know, something like that. And so maybe this is a principle, though. Maybe the principle is, if you are a good person, but you don't have a faith, a spiritual practice, right? We don't necessarily, we can expand our minds out. It's not necessarily, say, a particular religion, but if you do not have some sort of faith, something like that, but you are a good person, you follow the rules, you do all the stuff right, you might end up in limbo, right? So Dante is saying Christianity in particular, and if you didn't get baptized, you go through all of that. I wouldn't be surprised if we dive into other cultures and we see the hell there, they would say, hey, if you didn't follow this practice that is within our culture, then you end up in our version of limbo. We'll see. We'll see in future episodes if that's the case. So here are some of the people that he saw. So remember, we're in limbo now, which it sounds like it's not the worst of places, even though you're kind of in hell, but you're not really in hell, right? Limbo. Virgil, right? He saw Virgil there. Well, that is Dante's guide. Homer, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Julius Caesar, Hector. So basically what we're seeing is all the people who existed before Christianity, right? And so that again kind of ties into that idea of, well, Jesus hadn't come yet. He hadn't spread the faith. So you couldn't go to heaven at that point because you need that way to get to heaven. And he was the one who provided it. And so everyone who came before, no matter how great and wonderful they are, they ended up in purgatory. Maybe it's a little different than that. Maybe it's more like the various cultures. And if you kind of the general concept, if you don't have a faith, if you don't really have a direction, you're just going to kind of end up in this vague place. I guess maybe that kind of makes sense if we look at it like that, from that point of view. If you're not really on a path in this life, but you are a good person, after you pass away, you might just kind of end up in this vague place. It's like, okay, it's not heaven, but it's not really hell. It's limbo. Just to conclude limbo, these souls are not tormented like the sinners in other circles of hell. Instead, they are in a state of longing and desire. They yearn for God's presence. That kind of sums that up. But now we're going to get into it more. Now we're going to the second circle. The second circle of hell is a place of torment for those who were consumed by excessive and uncontrolled lust or sexual desire during their earthly lives. In Dante's Inferno, the punishment for the sin of lust involves being trapped in a violent, never-ending storm where the souls are buffeted by strong winds, rain, and hail. This constant turmoil reflects the restless and turbulent nature of their desires. Okay, now we're getting into it. Interesting. The first kind of real level of hell, right? Because limbo, we can kind of say it doesn't really count. The first one is lust. All right, so let's look into this for a second here. The souls in this circle are caught in a never-ending whirlwind, right? Symbolizing their lack of self-control and the chaotic nature of their desires. We dive into this for a minute here. Chastity in virtually every single culture is seen as a virtue. It's seen as very important. Monks in both the East and the West had to be chaste, right? They could not get involved in the nonsense of lust and all of that stuff. And as we're seeing here, that kind of makes sense. That's kind of like one of the first things that you have to, on pretty much any like really serious path of spirituality, you need to get rid of lust. In Chinese medicine, I'm going to pull Chinese medicine here. I know that we're not talking about that today, but me with my background in Chinese medicine, I kind of want to talk about that. All those activities will drain the kidney energy. The kidneys of the body are a very unique and special organ, according to Chinese wisdom, in that it provides the essence and the life force for all the other organs, and which then provides for the rest of the body. So in terms of health, in Chinese medicine for thousands of years, they believed that chastity, or at the very least, keeping it under control, as little as possible, like not, right? That would protect the kidney energy, which in turn would protect some of these fundamental energies and the essence of life. So we're seeing that it's not only important for the afterlife and as a principle, it is also important in just this cultivation of the body, right? Especially like in Taoist practices where they put a big emphasis on the transformation of the physical body into a divine body, right? In the West, we don't really think about that so much. You think about after we pass away, we move on. Or in Buddhism, maybe you pass away and you hit the shores of nirvana and then you're on the other side and you go there. Whereas in many Taoist practices, they're like, no, we're going to transform this physical body into a divine body that is then not limited by time and space. And so losing kidney energy through sexual activity is a big no-no in Taoism. So whatever culture we're looking at, and whether it's a spiritual path or not, whether we're just looking at Chinese medicine, probably a good idea to seriously think about this. This is, I don't want to dive into a bunch of modern notions and things like that, but this is something that we don't really take too seriously now. But hey, maybe we should. It's kind of like the first serious level of hell that you would go into. Level 2, get ready for it. It might not be what you're thinking. I'm calling it level 2. It's actually level 3, right? Because limbo is level 1. The third circle of hell is dedicated to the sin of gluttony, being fat, which involves excessive indulgence in food and drink during one's earthly life. Okay, didn't see that one coming. In Dante's vision of hell, gluttons are punished by being forced to lie in a vile slush, enduring a never-ending icy rain and hail, which parallels their excessive consumption and wasteful life. Wow! Okay. I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but nowadays it's like, hey, okay, we're not going to talk. We're just going to talk about being overweight is obviously not healthy. That's not even a discussion that we need to have. But here it's taking it a step further because we're not just talking about overweight. We're talking about what causes being overweight. And for most people, it's going to be the excessive consumption of food and the desire for food, gluttony, right? And so their punishment for hurting their body by eating all of this food and making themselves obese is the souls of the gluttonous are condemned to lie face up in a putrid, filthy slush, which is formed by the unending icy rain and the accumulation of waste. This slush symbolizes the grotesque consequences of their insatiable appetite. This is really interesting. Both this and lust, it's kind of like the punishment is almost like the desire, but in this gross, real form, and then that desire is just dumped on you all the time. We see that in both level 2 and level 3. And again, we are seeing that level 2 and level 3, lust and gluttony, are kind of starting to be accepted today as like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Is it okay? I'm not saying yes or no. All I'm saying is, from what Dante saw, your future is not looking too bright if you dive into either of those desires. The fourth level of hell is dedicated to the sins of greed. Greed. Okay, we're getting deep into it now. Specifically, avarice. I don't know if I'm saying that word right, which means extreme hoarding and, another hard word, prodigality, which means reckless spending or wasting of resources. Okay, so either just taking as much as you can, or just, getting rid, spending like it's going out of style. Hey, we don't see that in modern times at all, do we? In this circle, souls are divided into two groups, each punished for their opposing forms of material excess, right? So one is going to be taking in a lot, and one is going to be giving out a lot. Okay, so hoarding. This is what happens to the hoarders. Those guilty of hoarding, the sin, this excessive sin, hoarding, and attachment to wealth lie on the ground with heavy weights on their chests. They are unable to move and are forced to carry the burden of their earthly greed for all eternity. Oh, so if you want a lot of stuff, that is going to be a desire that becomes a very real thing. And then when you die, it's just weighing there on your chest. But maybe it starts to happen even before you die. Do we ever think of that? Right? We're thinking of this. Is this where you go after you die? Maybe it's already happening while you live. This punishment reflects their unwillingness to share their wealth and their obsession with material possessions. Sounds like a miser, right? Somebody who takes a bunch of stuff and then they end up all alone and by themselves in this massive mansion with all this stuff, eating pea soup or whatever, The sin of excessive spending or wastefulness are condemned to move in an unceasing circular fashion, chasing after a banner. This symbolizes the aimlessness and futility of their extravagant and reckless behavior in life. So they're just running around in a circle chasing a banner. I mean, that doesn't sound fun. Doesn't sound that bad. Actually, everything else sounds worse, much worse than this. But maybe I'm missing something. Plutus, just for a side note, the god of wealth in Roman mythology, guards the entrance to the fourth circle. His presence reinforces the theme of material wealth and its corrupting influence. Dante's portrayal of the fourth circle highlights the destructive nature of both extreme greed and extravagance. Whether through hoarding or squandering, those in the circle are forever trapped in a cycle that reflects their misguided and obsessive relationships with wealth and material possessions. So I brought something up there, and that's something that we want to think about. So I brought up a couple things. One, I brought up before about lust and kidneys and health, like our actual health. And if we kind of follow these rules, we might actually be healthier like now. But then too, there's also the idea, and this is where we have to kind of really stop and think, do these actions not only affect what happens after we die? Because that's one thing, because you could go, well, that's when I die. That'll be something else, or maybe it won't happen, or blah, blah, blah. But then the real question is this process kind of happening while we're alive? Are we starting to feel something? Like, does some of this start to happen now? And if we can change that, if we cannot do these things, if we were doing them, we can stop or reduce or, turn the boat around, or, if we can just steer clear of these, will we potentially be healthier physically? Will we actually feel better? Is it more than just a mental thing, right? Because Chinese medicine talks about qi, energy, but it talks about it as a very real thing. It's just we can't see it. Kind of like the idea that there are multi-dimensions and there's different parts of our body and it goes even deeper. There's a lot of things that we can't see. We can't see with our eyes. We maybe can't even see with microscopes or things like that. Or maybe some really crazy microscope in the future, we can see some of this stuff. But these actions, does it mess up our chi? Does it mess up our energy? Does it kind of block and actually start changing our, not only our physical body, but maybe deeper aspects of ourselves as well? These are the big questions we have to ask about morality. This goes far beyond, if I do something bad, am I going to go to hell and get whipped around a little bit, right? We shouldn't just think about it that way. The fifth circle of hell is unique in that it punishes two distinct categories of sinners, the wrathful and the sullen. Both sins are characterized by lack of love or goodwill towards others. All right? So now we're seeing, again, the two sides. It's like either side of a bad coin, basically. Wrathful are those who were consumed by anger and hatred during their earthly lives. In hell, they're punished by being forced to fight and attack one another on the surface of Styx, a river in the underworld. This ceaseless combat represents the discord and conflict caused by their anger. Gonna pause there for a second, too. The Chinese medicine in me can't let this go. Anger resides in the liver. The liver processes toxins, we know that, but it also processes emotional toxins. Because as I just said, according to Chinese medicine, it's all the same thing. Emotions are a very real physical thing. We just don't see it in this physical dimension. But I tell you what, we certainly feel it. It has very, very strong reactions on our body, right? Just because you can't see it here doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It very much exists. And it's a toxin as well, because your liver has to process that. Stress and all kinds of emotions go through that. And anger in particular is the one that really affects the liver. So, according to Chinese medicine, by being angry, you're going to really damage your liver. You're going to get liver fire. The qi in your liver is going to stagnate. You're going to have even more emotional problems. The liver will in turn attack your digestion. The wrathful should be careful also in this life. You're going to hurt your liver. The sullen, on the other hand, are those who were sullen, gloomy, and bitter in life, often refusing to engage positively with others. They were submerged beneath the Styx, eternally choking on the muddy waters, unable to express their grievances or communicate. This reflects their emotional coldness and refusal to engage with the world. Interesting. Let's think about that here for a second. Sullen, gloomy, and bitter, right? The downers of the world, the people who are, there's a whole other discussion of like, should we be positive all the time in the face of whatever? But then there's just the people who are just down all the time, who are just always negative. From Chinese medicine, this is just going to drain you. This is going to drain your energy. According to Dante, you're eternally choking in muddy waters. And it almost seems like that's what happens to these people, right? Somebody who's gloomy and like negative all the time, they're just choking on everything is just bad and they just all the time. So again, I think we're starting to see stuff that directly affect our lives today. At the entrance of the fifth circle, I'm going to very much mispronounce this word. Dante, I'm not even going to say it. I'm just going to call it the boatman. I don't know how to say his name. Dante and Virgil are transported across the river Styx by the boatman. The boatman represents the transport of souls across this river, which serves as a boundary between the circles and symbolizes the division between different types of sins. Dante uses the fifth circle, to underscore the destructive nature of anger, hatred, and bitterness, whether through active aggression, wrath, or passive withdrawal, sullenness. Those in this circle are trapped in a state of eternal conflict and emotional isolation, emphasizing the consequences of their lack of love and empathy during their earthly lives. This is a big one about emotions, controlling our emotions, right? Not just even just controlling them, letting them, we can do a whole thing about this in Chinese medicine about how, your emotions need to flow freely. Don't let them, affect you. Stoics talk a lot about this. This is a huge topic. And we're seeing here, if you don't get it under control, the 5th circle of hell is waiting for you, according to Dante. The 6th circle of hell is dedicated to the punishment of heretics, those who held beliefs contrary to the official teachings of the Catholic Church during Dante's time. Okay, again, we're going to pause there for a second, right? Dante wrote this again when Christianity and Catholicism are not saying anything good or bad about anyone, but maybe the principle of this again, maybe we can take this with a grain of salt and say the principle again is, instead of saying Catholic Church, can we replace that with spiritual practice, with a faith, with an upright faith, with a good faith, and not get too hung up on the particular spiritual practice? Can we do that? Maybe. The Christians might not agree, but others might agree. Maybe it's principle. We're more talking about principles because, again, this is not a religious book technically. This is a story. In this circle, heretics are condemned to spend eternity in burning tombs. The tombs are fiery and scorching, representing the heretics' departure from the true faith and their embrace of erroneous beliefs. The flame symbolizes the spiritual consequences of the heretical views. Here's an interesting thing that just came to mind. Okay, so this is maybe almost might prove my point. Who did we see in Limbo? We saw Socrates, and I believe we saw Plato. Let me go back up. Who do we see again? Let me remind myself. Virgil, Homer, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Julius Caesar, Hector. Okay, these people existed before Christianity, but you want to know what? They had their own faiths, right? They believed in the Greek gods or the Roman gods. A lot of them believed in that, but they weren't sent to this level. Therefore, it makes one wonder, okay, so what they believed in maybe was not necessarily wrong and bad, because if it was, they should be at the 6th circle, but they weren't. It just wasn't something especially high. It maybe wasn't a very high level belief. So we're going to pause again, okay? All of this is so nuanced. What we're going to do is we're going to dive very briefly into how the Chinese view heaven and earth. Okay, and this might help us kind of wrap our heads around some of this stuff. So in China, they have many spiritual practices. The 2 big ones are Buddhism and Taoism. But you want to know what? There are actually many types of Buddhism with many different Buddhas who taught different, people who became enlightened basically and spread their practices, not just Sakyamuni, not just Siddhartha, which we generally think of as the Buddha. And then there's even more Taoists, there's countless Taoists, and there's even more spiritual practices. If you read one of the classic novels like Journey to the West, or virtually any of these books, but Journey to the West is really good at showing this, it's not as simple as heaven and earth and that's it. It's like, there's earth, and then there's kind of all these different dimensions and beings of earth, and then there's levels that are a little bit higher, but they're close to earth, and then you go even higher still, and then you start entering into the celestial realms. And it's the heavenly realms, which are multiple worlds, multiple paradises of different practices and different beliefs. So there are various Buddhist paradises, there are Taoists, there are things that maybe aren't even paradises, but they're just amazing places where some of these immortals, these gods, where they live. If we take that as maybe the universe is more like that. Maybe there's not one earth, like just what we see here, but there's different levels to what we see here. I mean, there's got to be different levels to our body. We have all these experiences, these emotions and stuff. Is that just limited to this body and the hormones and things like that in the body, or are there deeper things to that? Right? The ancient Chinese would say there are much deeper things to that. And if we look at that, that's how in China they can justify, for example, the Jade Emperor. He rules over kind of like this big area of heaven that has multiple paradises. And when he throws a party, who does he invite? He invites Buddhas, he invites Taoists, he invites other immortals, all different types of beings to come. That kind of raises the question, could there be multiple paths to multiple different heavens? According to the Chinese, for thousands of years, that's the way they looked at it. So they don't have any problem with going, yeah, Buddhism's great. You can go, you can become a Buddhist, cultivate to Buddhahood, and go into a Buddhist paradise. Or you're into Taoism, cultivate that and go with that. And then they would say too, at the time they didn't have many other teachings, but that could probably expand out to different practices from the West and from other areas and cultures from around the world. You could open it up and say, yeah, the universe is massive and there's all these different places. So that answers kind of two questions. One is, hey, let's all get along. It's all good, and then, okay, a side topic. And then sometimes some of these practices will say, you have to follow this to go to heaven. Well, this answers that question too. Yeah. If you want to go to the Buddhist paradise, you gotta follow that Buddha's teaching because it takes you to that particular paradise. That's how the ancient Chinese would look at it, right? So whichever one you're going, you gotta follow that. That doesn't mean that the other one is wrong. That means that if you go down this path, you can't go there. Right? This leads to this paradise and that leads to that one. And this is the only path to this paradise and that's the only path to that one. And this is the creator of this paradise and this is the creator of that one. Wow. Us on the human world, we fight and fight over something that perhaps in the heavens are like, what on earth are you guys doing? Why? Why would you do that? That's human existence. What can you do? Okay, and then I said there was a second thing. Let me see if I can remember. The second thing is, accordingly, there are different levels. Okay, so basically, for instance, in Journey to the West, it kind of sees the Milky Way as like that's the river that separates the celestial realm. So basically higher realms than where we are. And we're in this not as high of a realm, but there are different levels before you get to the Milky Way. And there are different kind of worlds, paradises, you could say, whatever word you want, world, like that kind of thing. For example, the Buddhists talk about, right, you go to the other side and then you are totally free of suffering and you've gotten, like, that is kind of the real heavenly realms. But there are also kind of heavenly type realms before that point. Maybe if that's the way the whole universe works and we apply that to the West, then there are teachings that have actual paradises that are past the Milky Way and can lead you there. And then there are some that maybe don't quite make it that far. And so maybe back in the day in the Greek mythology and those gods, maybe they were gods on this side of the Milky Way. And you want to know what? That might kind of make a little bit of sense. Why? Because a lot of them were into fighting and warring and things like that. Things that are more that we experience here in the human world. We experience not just the human world, we'll call this side of the Milky Way, whereas other teachings of compassion and love and things like that are kind of the total opposite of that. And so therefore, I am making the argument that is why the people that we talked about, Socrates, Plato, all of these great philosophers and leaders, Julius Caesar, all these people throughout history did not end up in level 6. Why? Because they didn't do anything wrong. Their faith was not bad. It was not the wrong direction. It was only a faith that was on this side of the Milky Way. So it was higher teachings than the human realm, but it was not to the point where it could lead you to a true high heaven. So according to Dante, they ended up in limbo, just kind of this place where it's like neither here nor there, right? It's like, yeah, you're good people, but you didn't, you kind of got to take a spiritual path to go to one of these heavens, and the ones that you were on, the gods that you were following were maybe gods. I mean, these words are like, deities, immortals, maybe Zeus wasn't on the other side of the Milky Way. These are all things we can ponder. I'm thinking out loud here, but you want to know what? As crazy as it might be the way it is. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I got it all wrong. We're just having fun here. We're talking about this stuff. So I'm just going to wrap up here. Dante's portrayal of the sixth circle serves as a warning against deviating from the established religion orthodoxy of his time. Okay, we kind of talked about that, right? Maybe it's not that simple, but he made it that simple. Or it was just kind of for the people in that environment, just look, you got this faith and this is how we look at it. So here you go. Keep it nice and simple. The seventh circle of hell is a complex circle that encompasses various forms of violence, including violence against others, violence against oneself, suicide, and violence against God, blasphemers, and sodomites. This circle is divided into 3 separate rings, each with its own unique punishment. Okay, this is a let's get into it here. It's going to get intense. Seventh circle of hell. Here we go. The outer ring. Violence against others. In the outer ring of the seventh circle, those who committed violence against others are punished. This includes tyrants, murderers, and those who harmed others physically. The sinners are immersed in a river of boiling blood and fire. Oh, gosh. Symbolizing their burning intensity of their violent passions. Oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. Their violent passions is basically their burning blood. And so then they are cast down to be scalded in fire blood. It's horrible. Okay, middle ring. Violence against oneself, suicide, committing suicide. In the middle ring, the souls of those who committed suicide are transformed into thorny trees and bushes. Harpies, mystical creatures with the bodies of birds and the faces of women, feed upon their leaves, causing them constant pain because they're a tree or a bush. Wow. This punishment reflects the idea that those who took their own lives are now denied the form they rejected in life. Oh, interesting. Okay, so if you kill your own body, then that means that you don't want this existence anymore. So you're given a lower body to be in. And then, so you're made into be a tree or a bush. And then, but you still need to be punished because this is a good topic, right? Virtually every culture talks about humans are created based on what their God looks like, right? And they also talk about, we should talk about this sometime. It also, there's many tales about how clay or mud or things like that were used to create the human body. It's really, really interesting when you find these stories across cultures that never should have, or maybe never did interact with each other, yet they have virtually identical stories, especially about like the fundamental creation of humans and stuff. It makes you wonder, is there something to that? The inner ring. Okay, so the third ring, violence against God, blasphemers and sodomites. That's interesting. We'll see how they explain this. I'm not sure. Okay, in the inner ring, those who committed violence against God are punished. This includes blasphemers, those who spoke against God. Okay, so before we get into the sodomites, let's look at that real quick. I guess that kind of totally makes sense, right? Like if you curse a higher being, Hey, let's look at this another way. This is totally probably not right. I hope I'm not committing blasphemy. You know what? I'm not. Okay, well, like if you talk poorly about your boss and then they fire you, and then you go, nah, right? But if you talk poorly about your friend, it might not be so bad. I don't know. Is there something to that? Probably not. This makes sense, right? Blasphemers, especially if you say God created you, and then you speak poorly against him. That's not. Well, let's use another. It'd be like speaking poorly against maybe your parents. Let's break it down to a very earthly way of existence, right? Your parents, speaking poorly about them. I mean, that's kind of considered filial piety, in both the East and the West. That's traditionally been a very important thing. But that's not what this is saying, so I don't even know what I'm talking about. The next part of the inner ring, sodomites, those who engage in homosexual acts. The sinners here walk on a burning desert of scorching sand beneath a rain of fire. This reflects the idea that their actions were a rejection of the divine order and natural law. Oh, okay, so I get it now. So the inner ring of the seventh circle of hell are people who are acting directly against their creator, their God, and the standards that their creator, their God, made for them. I believe that's what it's saying. Okay, notable figures in the seventh circle. Oh, this is fun. Let's do this real quick. Include Alexander the Great. No, not Alexander the Great. He's so cool. He's down there? Really? And Attila the Hun. Attila the Hun was quite ruthless. In the outer ring, Pierre de Vigne, a political figure who committed suicide, and Capenius, a blaspheming figure from mythology. Okay, Dante's portrayal of the seventh circle serves as a powerful statement on the consequences of violence in its various form and highlights the idea that those who commit violent acts are subject to eternal suffering that matches the nature of their sin. Okay, now the eighth circle of hell is dedicated to the sin of fraud, which involves deliberate deception, manipulation, and betrayal within this circle. There are 10 distinct ditches, each designed to punish different forms of fraud. Okay, fraud. Wow, don't do it. Here's an overview of some of these ditches and their punishments. Okay, there are 10. You know what? Let's blast through these real quick. Let's get these out there so that we know. We don't want to skip over something. Panderers and seducers. That's the first one. Ditch. The souls of those who manipulated others for sexual pleasure or personal gain are whipped by demons as they march in opposite directions. Flatterers. This is the second. Flatterers are steeped in human excrement, symbolizing the filth of their insincere words and false praise. Oh, that's great. That's great. Simonists? Oh no, we're getting into words I don't know. Simonists, that's the third ditch, who bought or sold ecclesiastic offices and placed upside down in baptismal fonts with their feet set on fire. This represents their inversion of sacred rites. Oh, so it's kind of people who, I guess somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like people who go against kind of sacred worships or something like that, maybe. The fourth ditch, sorcerers and fortune tellers. Sorcerers and fortune tellers have their heads twisted around backward on their bodies, symbolizing their attempt to see the future, which they were not meant to know. Okay. Fifth ditch, grafters and corrupt politicians. Corrupt politicians. You are in the eighth level, fifth ditch. Those guilty of political corruption are submerged in boiling pitch and guarded by demons. This represents the sticky and dark nature of their deeds. Hypocrites. Ditch sixth. 6 of the 8th level. Hypocrites are forced to wear heavy, gilded robes on the outside while they are filled with lead on the inside. Oh no. Symbolizing the deceptive and false appearances they maintained. Okay. Ditch 7. Thieves are pursued by snakes and transformed into serpents when bitten. This mirrors their acts of theft and the idea that they are now thieves of one other's forms. False counselors are, this is 8, are trapped in flames which are concealed beneath a deceptive cloak of fireflies. You know, for something so deep, doesn't sound that bad. This reflects their misleading advice that led others astray. I wonder if the fireflies are like actual fire. Like they're flies on fire. Does it mean that? Because if it's just fireflies, you're just wearing a cloak with fireflies around you. Sowers of discord. Ditch 9. Those who sow discord among people are mutilated with their bodies torn apart, symbolizing the division they caused. Don't sow discord. Falsifiers including counterfeiters, are afflicted with various diseases, such as madness, representing the falseness and corruption of their actions. Wow! Level 8 is like a lot of people doing stuff. It's level 8, right? 8th circle. Dante's portrayal of the 8th circle serves as a profound exploration, yes it does, of the consequences of fraudulent behavior and the complex, tailored punishments that await those who engage in various forms of deceit and betrayal. Level 9. 9th circle. Treachery. The 9th circle of hell is the deepest and most severe level, reserved for the most heinous sinners of all, traitors. It is further divided into 4 separate zones, each designed to punish different types of treachery. The 9th circle represents the ultimate betrayal, and the punishments here are especially brutal. Okay. The first zone, named after the biblical character Cain, is for traitors to their close relatives, such as family members. Their souls are frozen in a lake of ice up to their necks, with their heads bowed, making it impossible for them to speak or see. Ooh, the coldness reflects the icy hearts of those who betrayed their kin. Okay, be nice to your family. The second zone, named after the Trojan prince Antenor, is for those who betrayed their homeland or city. Okay, so it extended beyond the family, and now they're betraying their homeland or city. Traitors to their countrymen are also encased in ice, but their heads are twisted backward, preventing them from seeing what's in front of them, symbolizing their twisted alliances. The third zone is named after Ptolemy? Is the P silent? A historical figure who invited guests to a banquet and then had them killed. Not cool. Ptolemy. In this zone, traitors who betrayed their guests or hosts are completely encased in ice, including their faces, and tears freeze over their eyes. This represents their violence of the sacred laws of hospitality. Wow, hospitality is a thing. It is for real. The fourth and innermost zone, named after Judas, is for the most treacherous sinners of all, those who betrayed their lords or benefactors. Here, the traitors are trapped within the frozen ice, the frozen lake completely submerged in ice. The icy waters are the coldest and most horrific in the entire Inferno, and at the very center of this lake, Satan himself is trapped, perhaps gnawing on the 3 most notorious traitors of all, Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Okay. The ninth circle serves as a stark reminder of the profound consequences of betrayal, especially betrayal of those whom one should hold in the highest regard. Satan. In the center of hell, Satan is depicted as a colossal and grotesque figure. He has 3 faces, each chewing on a different sinner. In Dante's version, Satan is frozen in a lake of ice. Okay, we just saw that in the 9th level, which is where he is, representing his imprisonment at the center of earth. The 3 faces are chewing on 3 infamous traitors. Judas, who betrayed Jesus, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar. Hey, fun fact is we saw Julius Caesar is, he's up in Limbo. He's hanging out in Limbo, whereas these 2 guys, much worse. This represents Satan's eternal consumption of the ultimate players. The frozen lake. The lake in which Satan is trapped is made up of frozen tears of the traitors. Oh, that's where the tears came from. Ha! It is an extremely cold and desolate place, emphasizing the depths of Satan's isolation and torment. Okay, so this ends the first part of the Divine Comedy. This is before he goes into before Dante travels into purgatory and then up into heaven. A lot to think about here. We discussed many topics. If this is an area that you are interested in exploring more, we can dive into more of these. We can continue with the Divine Comedy. We can also look at the concept of hell in other cultures from around the world and the concept of heaven and all of these different ideas and how these ancient this isn't even necessarily a belief, right? Maybe Dante saw this, right? If he saw this, how can we incorporate this into our lives today? Are these things real? Are some of them real? We kind of explored some of, maybe even this might affect our health, right? Maybe if we take these things a little bit more seriously, we might find that we live healthier, happier lives. I don't know. All right, if you enjoyed this, please go to ancientlifehacks.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I can put my notes. I'll maybe make some big PDF or something because this is way too much to put into the description here. But also, please like and subscribe. And by all means, share this video and other videos on my channel with your friends and family. Help me grow this so that I can continue making these videos. I hope you enjoyed. All right, I will see you next week.